Good. How you doing?
Oh, not too bad. Just gonna say, got a little bit of snow up here in Canada, but nothing too
Where are
crazy.
you in Canada?
Oh, I am just 20 minutes north of Detroit. I'm in Windsor.
Like London? Oh, Windsor. Okay, London. I know. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I actually, London is my hometown, and then I went to university in Toronto.
Ah,
So, how's your day?
how's my day?
Mm-hmm.
Frustrating so far. I boring reasons, but it's all part of life. But it's all right.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I keep it pretty conversational, light and breezy, a lot less crossfiery and a lot more just, one thing at a time. But yeah, just to get it
For
in.
some reason your audio is breaking up a little bit. I don't know.
Oh, hold on. Sorry, 1 second. Is that better? Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, perfect. But yeah, the first question I had right off the top, just to not necessarily get it out of the way, but I know it's definitely the most recent big time credit to your name, was what was your experience like joining the illustrious Marvel universe with the pilot episode for WandaVision?
It was interesting. I think, Alex, if you turn your camera off, I'll be able to hear you better. I'm saying
Oh,
that just
okay.
because I know from experience that if you turn it makes the audio work better.
There, is that better?
It's still cutting out for some reason. But you want
Oh,
to try reconnect, or you don't think that'll make any difference?
oh, it should probably be fine.
You want to reconnect or not? Up
No,
to
it
you.
should be all right.
Okay. All right. So it was an interesting experience. Marvel does everything on such a gigantic scale. And I had just finished doing an indie movie not long before that. And to see the breadth and the scope of the way Marvel does things was fascinating. And the idea, the whole conceit of it was interesting to me. And I must say that I admired Jack Schaefer, the writer, sort of creator producer, uh, uh, and um, everybody else involved for making a kind of a risky uh, bet, because it's very much not in the kind of usual Marvel scheme, the way they began. And Marvel has a kind of a faithful coterie, a following, an audience of people, a pre-made audience of people that will follow the stories. But this was certainly a curve to them. So I admire their grit in trying something so unusual as a story, as at least the baseline for a story in Marvel. And it was an enjoyable, interesting experience.
Yeah, well, because it definitely doesn't follow the typical Marvel formula or format. And it must have been kind of intriguing to see it pay such a grand homage to a lot of like television of an era that I'm sure you remember quite fondly and vividly growing up.
Yes, I do, and it's interesting to me because I wonder how many of the Marvel, for many of the Marvel faithful, I would imagine that's long in the past. They might be familiar with some of it from various places on TV where it still exists in kind of small pockets. But that a lot of that stuff was on television when I was growing up. In fact, my father was a television producer,
Mhm.
and he worked on some early kind of benchmark shows. There was a show that he worked on called Car 54, Where Are You, which was a very popular show, and another one called Phil Silver Show, and then a children's show called Let's Pretend. All of these were, big in their day. But so that whole black and white era is very familiar to me, of television. And it was interesting because even though when you look at those episodes, we particularly watched some Dick Van Dyke episodes in particular to kind of get ourselves into the groove of doing that Marvel those Marvel episodes, those early episodes.
Mhm.
Um, Even though there's a laugh track, and they were done before an audience, before a studio audience, the acting is pretty intimate. If you look at it, it's pretty real.
Oh yeah,
Um,
and that was
and
one. Oh, sorry, go right ahead.
if you compare it even to things that were done later in the 70s and 80s, it holds up well as being rather human in its proportions. The way the acting was done, it was not all set up punchline with no humanity to it. There were actually kind of human stories in there that were, and also that age, that particular age was an interesting age in television. The effect, the influence of method acting and of sort of kitchen sink screenwriting was very much felt in television. Early episodes of Twilight Zone and
Oh yeah,
Naked City,
absolutely.
and the acting was taken very seriously by the people that did it, and the writing as well. So I think in that sense, it's interesting to explore those things today. I still enjoy watching, a lot of that stuff today because the bar was so high of writing and acting and directing and all that.
Oh yeah, and when you look at how ahead of its time a show like Rod Serling's work on Twilight Zone was, and you look at its impact on even more modern iterations of that type of horror anthology format, like I look at a show like Black Mirror on Netflix, and it takes a massive influence from Twilight Zone in a much more gritty 21st century way. But it's funny you mentioned that on WandaVision, because it did feel much more like a stage play rather than on camera, in terms of, the storylines being simplistic, but they weren't necessarily simple. There was a lot of satire at work and a lot of different levels and layers to kind of move the whole process of the story along, and even the way they revealed information. And so it
Yeah, there's a
definitely.
sort of interesting dichotomy in that also, in that Matt Shackman, who was the director, a wonderful
Mhm.
director of the what I did, also a theater director, but also has directed, massive amounts of television, Game of Thrones, and, very large scale stuff in television, was
Yeah.
a child star himself, child actor himself, but now is a director. Anyway, I noticed that when you see the world that the characters live in presented, where things are kind of flowing normally with your expectations in regard to what goes on in the sitcom world, things are shot very much uh, like a play, sort of
Mhm.
two-dimensionally. And then when things start to go awry and your expectations are subverted about what's actually going on, and things start to appear not so solid in that world, I don't want to ruin it for people that haven't seen it yet.
Yeah.
When that sitcom world begins to kind of show that its cracks, then the shooting style becomes much more intimate, and it
Yes,
wasn't
absolutely.
so face forward. So that you get an interesting sense of the difference, examined in terms of shot construction, different kind of mood into the shot construction.
Yeah, and the way it plays out, it begins to color outside the lines and show a bit of the phrase in the what they perceive as reality in the show. It kind of added a very interesting twist to it and kept the whole thing along. And I also noticed that I thought you were such an interesting choice for that, because I know you have such a rich history on stage and studying acting in that environment in nature. And so I thought it was a very like natural fit to kind of see you move into a part like that.
Oh, and I also have horribly pompous, overbearing presence that I think was required. I also look like Richard Deacon to some degree, the actor who played Mel Cooley on the old Dick Van Dyke Show. So I think that was one of the considerations as well. In my mind, that I am that bald, bespectacled, unpleasant fellow that
Well, I was going to
is
say it
often.
certainly played in your favor, because when I looked at your credits for TV, beyond even just the things that I had seen you in, like Curb Your Enthusiasm and stuff like Brooklyn Nine-Nine, it was kind of amazing to see you as a character actor have this like latter day renaissance in your career, where, some people are able to get a few big hits to get their foot in the door, and then they try to just keep obviously in the business and continue to work while they're doing it. Whereas I noticed with you, it's almost like you're doing the biggest things, or more, I would say, popular things than you've almost ever done in your whole career so far. And I wondered what it was like to have that wealth of experience to draw from as you continue to move forward, while you edge yourself into these bigger and bigger projects that more modern audiences would probably recognize you from in a bigger way.
Yeah, you broke up a little there. I couldn't quite hear the whole question, but it's true that my career had a kind of as unusual late renaissance, as you put it. I spent many years. I trained as a so-called serious actor. I went to Yale Drama School, and I was trained in the theater, as we all were. There was no in the years that I was there. There was no training at all devoted to any other form of acting other than stage acting. The presumption, the rather pompous and probably incorrect presumption, being that if you were a competent stage actor, you would have no trouble adapting to other media where different things are required of you. But I found that I was not happy acting on stage, and actually, I had a very difficult time with it after a certain number of years doing it, and essentially said I don't really want to do it anymore, and then became a big voiceover star for many years, which I'm grateful that I had that opportunity, but it very much circumscribed. It was a very narrow field of things that I would do, and then occasionally a movie would come along, and I didn't pursue movies with any real gusto, but I enjoyed doing them. So there were a couple of casting directors, Howard Feuer and Juliet Taylor, the great casting director who directed, who cast all Woody Allen's and many other great directors' works, kind of took a shine to me and kindly used me. And I wouldn't audition for things. I was sort of spoiled, and I was making a lot of money, and I was not interested in dragging my cold meat out, my meat out into the cold wind of judgment and so on. So there were some people that just I would get a call from Juliet Taylor or from Woody's people, or Woody. I got to be kind of friends with him, saying, "Well, there's a psychiatrist. It's 5 days. Would you like to do it?"
Yeah.
Yeah, great. So just did it. But I didn't pursue acting with the same need as I had when I was younger. This went on for many years. And then the bottom kind of fell out, and the whole voiceover world changed radically. And all of a sudden, people with my kind of voice, kind of deep, dramatic sounding James Earl Jonesy voices, were very much outre. They were out, and so by that time I was married, I had children, I had responsibilities, and all of a sudden I was like not making any money. And this went on for years. And then I was kind of Lazarused by the Coen Brothers.
Ah,
The
yes.
Coen Brothers called me in 2007 with a movie. They were working on this movie called A Serious Man, and there was a part in it, kind of the villain of that movie, and they were actually sort of having a hard time casting it. And so Joel Cohen called and said, we have this movie. I have a feeling that you'd be really good in this part. I just have a feeling you'd be good in it. They were actually looking at the way it happened was I knew them a little bit because I had gone to school with Fran, uh, uh, Joel's wife.
Yeah, McDormand.
Um,
Yeah.
Fran McDormand, I should say Fran McDormand, Joel's wife, and John Turturro, and I knew John Goodman, and so I knew some people from their kind of retinue. And I
Hmm.
had auditioned for Barton Fink about, I don't know, maybe 20 years or 15 years before A Serious Man came along, and I didn't get the part that I auditioned for in Barton Fink. It was the part of Jack Lipnick, the movie executive, but
Oh,
the
yeah.
guy who
Behind the
was
big
in it.
desk.
It was wonderful, fantastic in it. But anyway, I kind of placed. I came in second, so they remembered me. And then years later, when they were kind of working on a bunch of films simultaneously, and they were casting Burn After Reading, and they happened to be looking at footage of Téa Leoni, the actress Téa Leoni,
Of course.
and they chose a scene to look at of me and Téa Leoni in a Woody Allen film that we had done together. So I was not. They meant to look at Téa Leoni, but I happened to be her scene partner in this scene.
Oh,
So
okay.
from that, they got the idea that maybe I would be a good choice for Cy Abelman. So they called me up, and I came into New York, and we met, and they said, "Well, okay, we definitely want you to do Cy Abelman, but we don't know when we're going to do it because we have 3 films we're kind of working on simultaneously." And one of them is Burn After Reading, which is a very star-studded film with George Clooney and lots of big stars. So we have to do it based on when we can get when those stars are available, Brad Pitt and so on. So that came first. So I had to wait another year, more than a year, until we made A Serious Man. In the meantime, I was, the till of money was completely empty.
Mm.
but but then we made it, and then of course it was another year until it came out because it takes a long time to do post-production on a movie.
Yeah, of course.
But then by the time it did come out, it kind of completely reinvigorated my career as an actor, and that's now about, I guess, 10 11 years 10 11 years ago.
Yeah.
So since then, it's been terrific. I've enjoyed it tremendously. And when you're an actor, there's kind of two piles. There's a pile of things that you do because you need to make money, and there's a pile of things that you do because the part is great, or the script is really compelling, or there's a director or another actor or somebody that you really want to work with. So these two piles, and once in a while, if you're really lucky, these piles, there's a confluence between them, once in a while.
Yeah.
But you have to be extremely lucky
Yeah.
for that to happen. So most people just pick their projects based on, there has to be a compelling reason. The part's really great. I love this director, or I want to make some money. So yeah, and that's if you're lucky.
Yeah, right.
That's if you're lucky. So there are always those considerations. I think most people who are movie fans, or many people who are movie fans, are not aware of the fact that even big stars do a lot of movies for very little money. Like if you work with Woody Allen or the Coen Brothers or other people, you make very, very little money. But people always want to work with them because the films they make are great, and they also give people great opportunities in terms of the characters that are written for them. So, but that's just that's the way it is with working with a lot of the really most respected, most beloved directors, Martin Scorsese and Paul Thomas Anderson, Alexander Payne, many others. It's the same situation.
I can imagine, because there's so many moving parts at play in those types of movies that even though they might not be a comic book juggernaut, there's so many hands on deck that even though you might get a small part, it'll probably be a great film. And I was just wondering how working with some of those like really cherished auteur directors really prepared you for other roles that you had later in life where you're like, oh, well, thank God I had that experience working with Joel and Ethan, because it made me, like, totally prepared me for this other part down the road I didn't even see coming.
Well, when you say how did it prepare you, I'm not sure what you mean. You mean, did working with them teach me something about acting? Is that what you mean?
Well, I'm just going to say not just about acting, but even just your approach to crafting a character and maybe taking on certain roles that you might not have if you hadn't taken on stuff like Cy Abelman to begin with.
Well, I mean, the truth about directors, and here's another thing that maybe people that are film fans don't know, is that the really good directors don't tell you too much. Truthfully, the really good directors, especially the good writer directors, for example, the Coens, furnish you with a script in which the world is very fully realized. Now, when I worked with them the first time, which was in A Serious Man, I was really kind of surprised because their films are so crafted. Every detail of their movies is so consciously put together that I was very surprised that when we actually got there on the set, they give very little in the way of direction. They like you to stick to their script pretty tightly, which not all writer directors do. Woody, for example, says, say anything you want. He doesn't care what you say.
Oh, no way.
The point is kind of the same. But they like you to stick, their writing is literary and poetic often, and they like you to kind of stick to it. You sometimes, a lot of actors might request to do a little improvisation, which you do sometimes, and rarely does it wind up in the film.
Yeah.
Rarely. Sometimes it may seem improvisational, but it's not. That has to do with the quality of the acting, the skill of the actors, and so on. But I was surprised with the Coens that they were so open and free so they give you this script, and then when you get there, like the good directors, they let you run. They let you do your thing. They spend a long time casting, and they're very careful about who they cast. And if you look in their movies particularly, you'll notice that even the smallest roles are cast very carefully, and they often get wonderful actors that are memorable and interesting, even in tiny parts.
Oh,
Um,
absolutely.
but they don't tell you much what to do. To give you a little story about that. So because of that film, I went to the Independent Spirit Awards in, I guess it was 2010. I can't remember, 2010, 2011, one of those years. I won an award along with other people in that film for that film at the Independent Spirit Awards.
Oh,
So while I was there, and it's a big, it's a big party, and it's a lot of fun, and it's very nice because you're being recognized by your peers. It's wonderful.
of
And so
course.
I was there. I started talking to Robert Duvall, I'm a big fan of.
Oh,
You know,
yeah.
and we were talking, and he had never worked with the Coens. And he said, "What's it like working with them?" And did they? And I said, "Well, I told him what I just told you. He said, "Oh, they leave you alone." I said, "Great, that's exactly what I like. I like to be left alone." Um, and very many times I've been told, "Oh, such and such is a real actor's director," uh, and that's meaning like he likes to get into how you create the character with you. That's usually not what I want. I want a director who trusts what I can do, and then has the knowledge to frame it within the context of the film that he envisions, who obviously has an overview of the film where my character fits in it, and how to put that up in a way that creates something that haunts the audience.
And
But
stick.
I don't like to have too much help creating a character unless I'm in trouble, and then I'll ask for help. And even then, the really good directors don't tell you a lot. I'll give you another example of that. One
Great.
of the early films that I made back in the 80s, 1985 or 6, I can't remember exactly. It's a film called Suspect with Cher, Dennis Quaid, Liam Neeson. I did a bunch of films with Liam Neeson, 3 or 4 in a row before he was a star, big star. Anyway, so
Interesting.
this was a film with Cher, mostly shot in Toronto, by the way. Toronto, and this is in the days when a lot of American production was going on in Toronto.
Mhm.
So I played, Cher played a legal aid lawyer who has to defend a mute, played by Liam Neeson, who is accused of murdering someone. And in the process of going into that murder, she finds out about other murders. So in that film, I play her boss, the head of the Legal Aid Society of Washington. The film is set in Washington, D.C., nation's capital, our nation.
Mm.
So this character that I played, her boss, was a kind of very long-suffering guy who put up with, and there's a lot of talk in the movie about how we defend people that are mostly guilty. They don't help us very much in their defense. They often don't show up for their hearings. The judges tire of them because they're ill-disciplined in how they approach court appearances and so on. So, why do we keep doing it? Why do we keep at it? Why do we keep we could make a lot more money in the private sector as attorneys, particularly if we defended clients that had, money. So why do we insist on doing this for poor people that don't have resources? And, we give an answer, which is that we kind of believe in the system, even though we're jaded to the fact that it often doesn't work right. But I couldn't get a very good grasp, I didn't feel, on the character. I mean, I kind of understood him, but I didn't have a deep understanding of him. And I felt like a little worried about what I was doing. So I said to the director, a wonderful director, now gone, called Peter Yates, wonderful English director who directed Bullet and many
Yeah,
other films.
classic.
Yeah. So I said to Peter, I don't think I have a firm grasp on this character. And he said to me, well, here's something. He said, he has a lot of children at home. That's what he said. A
Mm.
lot of kids at home. Now, nowhere in the script does it say anything about he has a lot of kids at home. It's not hinted at. It's not alluded to. It doesn't exist at all in the script. It was just his idea, right? And he said that to me. Now, what does that mean? Well, it could mean that he's extremely patient. You know, somebody who has a lot of kids might be very patient and used to people not doing what he wants. It also could mean that he needs to get out of the house. You know,
Yeah.
no, really. I mean, it could,
Oh, I
there
believe
are
it.
many possible interpretations or consequences of that idea. But he just said that little thing, that little sentence,
Planted that seed.
and and it something it opened up a certain sluice gate in me, and suddenly I got this idea of who he is, and I knew. Likewise, I remember early on when I was talking to Ethan, although I had a strong idea about how to play this character, Ethan Cohen, he used the expression, he's a large presence, but not a loud one.
Ah.
Now, that's a total of, what is it, 6 words? A
Mhm.
large presence, but not a loud one. That's 8 words. That gave me a very, very good idea about what I wanted to do with the character. I had further thoughts that were not in his direction or in his script, like that he should be a massager of people.
Yeah.
You know, I was very influenced by a guy called Michael Chekhov, an acting teacher and theoretician, about how to pursue it, how to approach a character.
Yeah.
And
Legendary stuff.
yeah, so Michael Chekhov's fundamental idea is that every character has what he calls an essential gesture. So that is a kind of metaphorical way of looking at a character. So every character has a physical gesture. And it doesn't mean that he actually does the physical gesture. It means that it metaphorically kind of describes how he approaches the world.
Hmm.
So I thought of Cy Abelman as a massager. In other
Right.
words, the way he approaches people, and actually every situation, but primarily people, is that he tries to sort of hypnotize people with his manner and tries to get them to relax. And he genuinely believes that if people would just listen to him, you know, the world would swing, the world would be
Yeah.
better. But of course, he has his own selfish ends. But like most people that do evil in the world, he actually believes that in his bullshit, that if he's telling, you know, that people would listen to him, all would be well with the world.
It's funny you mention that as well, because even in his speech patterns and his tone and like his cadence, like when he brings over the bottle of wine and he's just like, Larry, you need to just let it breathe, breathe. It certainly reflects all of those qualities in the performance, but it's interesting to hear how both of you were able to kind of apply that attitude and kind of find your way in to the character. And the Coens were able to kind of, like Cy says, just breathe and let the performances breathe and come off much more naturalistic than feeling staged per se. And I think that's
Yeah, I
also
mean,
very much reflected in a lot of, like you mentioned, the careful casting, because coming off of something as huge as No Country for Old Men, and then them going directly into this passion project with somebody like Michael Stuhlbarg as the lead, who isn't like a quote unquote traditional movie star. There's a lot of like subtle but very bold choices in that film. And it's interesting to hear how nuanced they are, even in, as you mentioned, the little stuff, like how they geared you up for Cy that way.
yeah, they're just masterful at it. You know, that's what they do. They're great. It's funny, you know, there are some filmmakers who are only good at or only really have a taste for one aspect of filmmaking. There are filmmakers, for example, that I know who are not crazy about your time on the set.
Mm.
Uh, you know, they are more comfortable when they have everything shot in the can, and they have all their elements. They have all the scenes to look at. They have the music. They have all the editing. You know, they work with the editor, and in that environment, when they're in the dark room, going through the laborious and but very important process of tone, getting the tone of the film together through all the choices they make, then they feel good. But actually being out there with people is not so great for them. I know quite a few filmmakers like that, and there are some people the opposite who enjoy working with the people and feel comfortable with that, and they're not as great at making, you know, other decisions that are tonal, or it's not so much their world. But the Coens actually are good at and seem to enjoy writing, doing the pre-production, which is a big part of filmmaking, making
Mhm.
it, and then doing all the stuff at the end. Now, in real life, they don't do a lot of hanging out together when they're not working, which I don't blame them for
Yeah,
because they're working so much of the time. They work so much.
of
They
course.
view themselves. It's interesting. They view themselves as lazy. But speaking as a genuine lazy person, I find their self-image as lazy people as humorous.
Yeah, well, because I recently heard a interview with Joel talking on the Roger Deakins podcast, and it's a fantastic interview if you ever get a chance to hear it, because he does press so rarely as well that it was kind of just this like diamond in the rough that popped up out of nowhere. And
Well, as you know, Roger is not only his collaborator of many, many years, but also, his friend. So I think he was, being extra. We go out of the way to be on Roger's show where he might not want to with somebody else.
yeah, which is totally fair and a valid point for sure, because I felt like Roger was also able to kind of get a lot of interesting answers out of him that maybe a regular reporter wouldn't. And so it was funny to hear him take this casual approach to the way he discusses everything when he might describe himself as lazy. But as you mentioned, he was working on Burn After Reading, No Country for Old Men, and A Serious Man essentially simultaneously all at once. And he was very quick to remind people like, we're always working on something. We're always writing something. So
Yeah.
it must be quite an exciting process to get on board while it's still snowballing before you see the final results.
Well, I think unless you are a star that they have in mind for something long in advance, most people don't really get in that writing phase. That's kind of, they have an office and they go to it and they kind of that's their kind of alone phrase. Although they have, part of their MO is that they have a kind of one reason that they're able to turn out films on modest budgets that are so good is because they tend to work with the same people over and over again.
Yes.
They work with, Mary Zofries and Roger Deakins and Jess Goncher and various other people, and certain actors too, again and again and again. And part of what I have to say about them is, um, it's actually important when you make a film that you like the people that you work with, if at all. I mean, obviously, sometimes it's not always possible, but it makes you work. You're in the trenches together, and sometimes it's a long time. And the nature of it is it's very intense, long hours. And if you enjoy each other, it's makes it far better. No
Of
kidding,
course.
really.
Yeah.
So so I think they hire people with that in mind, as well as the competence of the people, obviously. Um, but they're great. They're great people. I mean, I truly, they're very. Not only are they super smart, they're smart about things outside the rather narrow world of filmmaking. They're very literate people. They read a lot, and they're interested in a lot of different things. I one of the problems, if I may, complain about my acting brethren, who is that um, a lot of people who are actors, most of my friends are actors because you make most of your friends through work.
Yeah.
That's kind of normal.
Mhm.
But sometimes you don't want to hang out with actors all the time because a lot of actors, even actors that are good people in other respects, um, are very concerned with what they're doing, with what their projects are and what the possibilities are, and also with their own emotions. So that can become that can wear thin at times.
Mhm.
I like people who are interested in the world and a lot of things, and I'm interested in physics. I'm interested in art. I'm interested in movies. I love movies and movie making, but I'm also interested in how economics works, and I'm interested in a lot of things. When I got to know George Clooney, I was amazed is not the right word, but I was deeply impressed with how conversant he is about so many things. He's a really, really intelligent well-informed fellow with interests about a million things.
Oh
Some
yeah.
some of that some of that has activated his political activism, which I admire, but some of it just makes him an interesting guy,
Hmm.
and you know, you might not think that somebody that occupies a kind of a what our closest version to a matinee idol, or did for a long time anyway, might not be so Catholic in his interests, so well informed, but he is. That's just the way he is.
Hmm.
So that's a great that's a lovely thing to find in a person who is also very good at what they do. So the Coens are like that. They're extremely smart. And also they're very funny and very, Woody is entirely different. Woody, who is now, going through this horrible shunning, in my view, this is my personal view.
Yeah.
But Woody is a person who is obviously extremely funny, unbelievably talented, but he is, a little misanthropic, let's say. I don't know exactly, or anhedonian, if that's the correct word. Annie Hall was originally called anhedonia, which means which means the state of not being able to be happy, the psychological state of zero happiness. So Woody's he's not like that, but he chose I did a play where he was one of the authors of it. I was talking to him backstage one night, and he said, truthfully, if I could just write the scripts and then have somebody else make them, I'd be very happy to go to write all day, sit in front of my typewriter for 8 hours a day, go out, have a nice dinner, go home and watch basketball, and I would love it. I
Yeah.
don't need to
Right.
make all these. I don't need to make all these films, but the fact of the matter is, I don't trust anybody to make them. I can't find anybody that makes them the way that I would make them, so I keep making them. And I think that's true. Movie making is an unending source of rubbing up against other people and also of problem solving. That's what I think some people don't understand about when you're actually making the movie. I remember saying to Ethan Cohen, I have the best movie makers have some movies that are great and some movies that I can't watch, including the Coens, and I adore the Coens, but they have some movies that they made that I just can't stand. And they have some movies that I think are incredibly great. One of the movies that I love in their catalog is a film called God, a film called The Man Who Wasn't There.
With Billy Bob Thornton, yeah,
Billy
and
Bob
James
Thornton is the leader.
Gandolfini,
James
yeah.
Gandolfini, right? So that's one of their films I mean, people know it, but I don't think it's not nearly as famous as Barton Fink or
Fargo or something like that.
Fargo. Yeah, but to me, that is a fantastic film.
Is
Just
very underrated.
every frame of that film is so beautifully thought out, and the performances and the script, it's just great. I just love that film. And I remember saying when we were working on something, I don't remember what it was, together, to I think it was to Ethan, I think that's such a great film. It's just I just love that film. And he said, yeah, well, he couldn't get Billy Bob's wig to fit right. And black and white processing was never the way I wanted. And like he delivered up a series of problems that had to be surmounted to make that film, because all the beautiful things that were in it that they had envisioned in the script writing process, in fact, in realization, in real life, as they made the film, they were somewhat disappointed that they didn't come out the way that they had imagined.
Yeah.
Likewise, I was talking to Woody once, and I said, we were talking about, I can't remember how it came up, but he said, we were talking about Manhattan, which is his black and white, one of his black and white classic films, which I think is a fantastic film, beautiful. And he said to me, oh, God, I can't look at it. I said, really? I said, why not? He said, well, because it's so different than what I envisioned. To me, that film is great. And the denouement, the turnaround in that film, when he keeps telling her to go to England, and then he doesn't want her to leave.
Because he can't
It's such
imagine his life without her.
right. It's such masterful, beautiful screenwriting to me. But he said, he said, I tried to buy up every print of that. He said, I literally offered them to make another film for zero, for no money, if they would not
Whoa.
release that, if they would not release that film. And I thought, wow, his perception of that film is so different from mine. To me, that's such a great film. He
Yeah.
hates it. He can't look at it.
Well, and
But that
especially,
just,
oh, sorry, go right ahead.
when you, I'm sorry, what?
Oh, I said, sorry, go right ahead.
So, when you envision something, writing it, especially if you're a writer director, you always have to give up certain ideas you had about it. And then, of course, you have the other thing where, you hire an actor or a scene designer or anybody, and they bring something that you hadn't anticipated, which it makes it better. So there's both ends to it, there's both sides to it.
Certainly, not
Um,
all surprises are bad, right?
of course, of course.
Yeah, and it's so funny you mentioned that about Manhattan, because I think even when you look at all the different performances that Woody managed to get out of Diane Keaton alone, even like in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and just to see her give such a funny turn in that, especially in contrast to Meryl Streep in that movie when they're both so young. And it's so funny to see them in that particular movie now, when you see what amazing careers they had ahead of them and so much presence that they were able to bring on to all of those scenes, even just right from the beginning. It's kind of interesting.
Well, they were both great. They were
Yeah.
both great, and they were great even when they were young.
Oh, yeah.
I remember seeing Diane Keaton when I was 13. I believe I was 13. My dad, I met Woody Allen very early because my dad had a very close friend, a guy named Kenneth Roberts, who was a famous television and radio announcer in the golden age of radio and the early days of TV.
Hmm.
And my dad and he were very close. And his son was Tony Roberts, the actor. So I grew up knowing Tony Roberts very well. He's somewhat older than I am, but we've always been friends, and he's a great guy and wonderful actor. But anyway, I've known him all my life. So he got the part, Tony Roberts, in Play It Again, Sam, which is Woody
Hmm.
Allen, was a Broadway show that Woody Allen wrote and starred in, and it starred Tony Roberts, Woody Allen, and a guy called Jerry Lacey playing Humphrey Bogart, and of course Diane Keaton. So I got to see Diane Keaton and meet her, and also meet Woody and all those people when I was only 13. I went backstage and met them. And then I got to know Diane Keaton a little bit later. I also did a movie with her, now kind of obscure movie that not a lot of people know about, a very interesting movie called The Good Mother. Um, which in another film with Liam Neeson, an early film with Liam Neeson, directed by Leonard Nimoy.
Really?
Yes. Very interesting experience working with Leonard Nimoy. I really enjoyed that. He was great. And I was a big Star Trek fan, but
Of course.
I didn't let that interfere. I didn't want to, bother him with that. But he was very interesting and very warm and very sort of collegial. And I used to sit eating lunch with him and talking to him, and he was very, very open and very encouraging. And I really enjoyed him. I was very, very sorry to see him pass away. Well, as I guess as everybody was.
Yeah.
But that was a very interesting experience working on that film. And it's on television sometimes or on various streamers. It's called The Good Mother, and it's a very interesting, sad story. I don't want to ruin it for viewers, but it stars Diane Keaton, and she's terrific in it.
I'll certainly have to keep my eyes open for it. But one thing I also wanted to throw in quickly was, it was also, speaking of like the huge boom in your career later on, it's also very inspiring to see guys like you and Woody and Diane Keaton doing some of their biggest or best work, or both, such later in their careers. Because I remember going to see Blue Jasmine in theaters and being totally blown away. I went and saw it with my mom. And so to see him making movie 50 or 51 or whatever one he's on now is very impressive, just for the stamina alone, because I know he plays more of a quantity than quality game, but to see him still doing some of his best work that he has ever done at this phase in his life, in his career, is very impressive.
Yeah, it's interesting. He doesn't bat 1,000, but none of the good ones do.
Yeah,
There's
exactly.
there's movies of Woody's, there's movies of the Coen Brothers, there's movies of Martin Scorsese's, there's movie of, my very favorite filmmakers that that I just don't like. And I think that's because in order to be really great at anything, any artistic endeavor, any pursuit, you have to be willing to kind of take a leap. You have to be willing to jump into something where you don't quite know how it's going to turn out. And therefore, you occasionally take a spill.
Yeah, it's not always perfect.
No, it shouldn't be, because it requires that degree of courage and of sort of innovation to make things that are great.
Well, and that's kind of
So,
the fragile beauty of it, right? It's not exactly something you can
absolutely.
hold in your hand. It's a process of discovery. And I remember
Exactly.
hearing.
And it's
Oh, sorry. Go
I'm
right
sorry.
ahead.
Well, it's a strange chemical, especially in filmmaking. I've done things both on stage and on film or TV where you read the people that are involved with it, and you think this cannot fail. It just sounds great. Great writer, great actors, terrific director, and the script even looks good and everything. And then you do it, and then for some reason, the things don't coalesce into something good, even though you felt like they should. And the reverse is also true. Although it's much harder to make something good from a poor script.
Yeah.
But there's always an element of sort of an unpredictable level of chemical interaction that you can never really prognosticate accurately. You try, of course, especially since there are vast sums of money involved. But one of the exciting things about making movies or television shows or anything like that is that part of it you just don't know. It just has to, it kind of jumps to life, or it doesn't.
Yeah. And some of the magic is in the mystery, right? It's like that William Goldman quote where he's like, don't listen to anybody out here. Nobody knows. It's all a gamble.
Well, there's a great Evelyn Waugh quote. He said, there are three secrets to writing a great novel. Unfortunately, nobody knows what they are.
Yeah. Well, and I think I can't remember exactly who said it, but it also quickly reminds me of the quote where when you make one movie, you're actually making three movies. It's the movie you write, the movie you shoot, and then the movie you cut together in editing. And so if you're able to kind of wrap your head around all three of those beasts coming together to have the same body, even though they might have different heads, sometimes, like you mentioned, it can surprise you in quite amazing ways when you least expect it.
There's always an element of surprise, and there's always an element of disappointment and of relief. Joel Cohen, who started out as an editor, by the way, told me that this is the way almost every film happens. When you shoot a film, you look at dailies, rushes. In other words, you look at what was shot the previous day.
Yeah.
See how it came out. So he said, you look at the rushes, you look at the dailies, and you go, oh, this is pretty good. this is not bad. It might not be exactly what I had in mind, but it's not bad. The performances look good. He said, then you get your first loose assembly. Your first loose assembly is when you make your first extremely rough edit. You just kind of put the scenes in the order where you think that they belong, and it's not tightly edited, but you have this, what they call loose assembly. He goes, then you look at your first assembly and you go, oh, I want to kill myself. This can never be. This is a hopeless piece of shit. I can never, ever, ever make anything remotely like what I had in mind out of this. It's just not possible. And then little by little, as you trim it and you make decisions and you do various things and you goose certain things and you eliminate other things, little by little, it takes shape again. And you go, oh, yeah, this is okay. This is all right. But it's never the thing that you envisioned. It's something else.
Well, and there's that, speaking of Woody, it's his famous kind of saying behind The Purple Rose of Cairo, where he was just like, well, the thrust behind the story is that the fantasy of it always fulfills, but the reality of it always disappoints because it's always going to come up like a little bit short. And it kind of reminds me of the screenwriting process where in act one, you're like so thrilled because you're like, oh my God, it's finally happening. And I'm seeing the words come together on the page. and then you get into about like the bridge in the middle of Act Two, and you're like, oh my God, where am I going with this? Like, is this ever gonna pull itself across the finish line? And then once you finally get into even the beginning of Act Three, you're like, I'm gonna finish this, even if I have to drag it kicking and screaming. And then you finally go into the separate or subsequent drafts, and slowly and slowly it starts to look like you kind of knew what you were doing all along, hopefully, and begins to kind of sculpt, take shape.
Right, and there's a theory about that. I don't know if it's true or not, but there's a theory that if you have second act problems, it's because your third act, the problem lies in your third act. In other words, you should know the resolution of your third act before you embark on your second act, and that most second act problems have to do with not heading towards the third act. Now, that's a bit of screenwriting lore, some of which is just bromide, some of which may be true. But I have to say, having attempted to screenwriting myself and still working on it, it's the hardest form of writing. It's extremely hard to me, because it has to be, if it's done well, it has to be so pared down. It has to be so elegantly trimmed, and you have to get the things in there that you want with no fat at all.
It's a very light touch, and it's a very funny format as well, because it's also very technical, even compared to a novel. I wouldn't say it's better or worse, but it's very different than what even most people think, right? And what
absolutely. I mean, if you're writing a novel, you can kind of say what you want. You have a certain degree of freedom, both to be prolix and also to describe things and to switch voices and things, which in a screenplay you don't have. Screenplay is you have to stick within the voices of the characters. And the thing that Ethan Coen said to me is everything that doesn't either move the story forward or reveal the characters out.
Yeah.
And you have to kill your darlings. It's very hard. Can you excuse me 1 sec? I just have to take a pause for 1 second. I'll be back in a minute. Okay. Sorry about that, Alex.
Oh, no worries. So, yeah, I was just going to ask you, after having read so many scripts for film, TV, and stage, what are some of the essential elements or fundamental building blocks that kind of tip you off to being like, wow, this is something I could get into?
You know, your audio cut out, so I didn't hear the beginning of the question. How do I choose what characters I want to play, or how to play them? I didn't hear the beginning.
Oh, I was just, the question was, what are some of the key and essential elements you look for in a script that tip you off to being like, wow, this is something I could really get into, or like, this is something out of the ordinary or something really special?
Well, I mean, I think I probably have, fairly. You're going to get standard answers for that question. Number one, does it intrigue me? Do I want to keep reading it when I start reading it? Is it a labor to get through it, or do I immediately think, oh, I'm drawn into this? Secondly, is everything in it, when I read something, do I immediately know what's going to happen, who the person is, what they're going to do? Is it all what my expectations are, or does it subvert my expectations? Um, there have to be surprises in it to make it uh, worthwhile. Um, what else? It has to be, in terms of character, I'm looking for characters that I think are interesting for me to play, and they have to have a degree of contradiction or depth, usually, in order to be interesting to play. In other words, um, for example, I did a film called In a World. So in that film, In a World, I play the father of the protagonist, who is a young woman who wants to make a kind of a splash in the voiceover world. And I play her father, who is kind of the grand poobah of voiceovers. But he's so deeply riddled with insecurity that he can't stand the thought of his own daughter competing with him. And he goes out of his way to actually crush her hopes. So he's a really shitty father. And
Mm,
yet in his way, he does love her. Um, you know, Saibelman is an evil, obviously evil character, but his method of being evil is to be incredibly warm,
yeah.
overwhelmingly warm, maybe. So he's annoying because he's over intimate with people. So, characters are interesting because they're not reducible to simple tropes or simple descriptions. They have, in an evil character, you're always looking for what's heroic in them. And in a heroic character, you're always looking for things about them that are not heroic. Um, so, that's the kind of, and when you read a script, um, immediately if something makes an impression on you and you get a strong visual idea of what the thing is, whether or not you want to go into that world. And then there are other considerations that are more mercenary, like how big is this part? Do I want to work with this guy? Is there going to be a significant amount of money involved in making this decision? Is this something that's different from what I have done and therefore more interesting to me, and also more interesting for the audience to see me play something that they're not used to seeing me do? All those considerations come into it too.
Yeah, of course. And I guess the final question I had for you is, what's the next big thing on the horizon? What are some projects or filmmakers you really looking forward to working with? Or is there something that you're kind of in the midst of that you can divulge a few details about that you're really excited about moving forward with?
Sure. Well, let me first put in notices for two films that I have that were both kind of festival darlings. One of them was at Sundance. It actually opened yesterday at Sundance and
Oh,
was very
wow.
well received. Called Together Together, uh, uh, in which I play another father, the father of Ed Helms' character. It's a very interesting film about a man who's about 45 years old, played by Ed Helms, who has a strong desire to have a child, and he's not in a relationship with anybody. He doesn't have a wife or a girlfriend or anything. So he gets a surrogate,
Mm.
and the surrogate is impregnated with somebody else's egg, not her egg, but he has this surrogate who's going to have his child. So kind of unwittingly, they begin a kind of a friendship. And pardon me, excuse me. It's about this friendship, this relationship that develops between uh, uh, this character and the surrogate character, and it's a very interesting film. And the filmmaker, a wonderful writer director called Nicole Beckwith, um, wanted to make a film about love that's not romantic love. You know, there's so much emphasis placed on romantic love and the forever quality of love that she wanted to make. And she said, you know, rightly, that many of the most important loves in our lives are friendships, not romantic loves.
Yeah.
And so that's what this film is about. So I want to put in a plug for that film. And it was, I believe it was purchased. I don't know when, but I'm guessing that probably by around the spring or summer, it'll be on a streamer or on cable. Then another film that I did, also did very well at the festivals, called Shiva Baby. Um, Also a very interesting movie about a young woman who is pressured by her family to live a certain way, and she's not really that way. And she's making money by being a kind of a sugar baby for a guy who is older than she is. He's not old, but he's older than she is.
Mm.
And they have this kind of pay for play sexual relationship. And then she goes to a shiva of a friend of her parents, and it turns out this guy is at that shiva with his wife and daughter. So that's what that film is about, and also very interesting, funny, kind of interesting, cringely but very funny film. And then I have some films on the horizon that haven't been made yet. There's a filmmaker that I love, a very interesting filmmaker, a great guy, also novelist and musician, really remarkably. Renaissance man is a very hackneyed expression, but that's really what he is. His name is S. Craig Zoller,
Yes.
and I don't know if you know his work or not. We've collaborated on three films together, and we're about to do not about to do, but we're going to do a fourth film
Yeah,
uh,
I saw
called
Dragged
Hug.
Across Concrete and
Oh yeah,
Ball in Cell Block 99. Very visceral. Well, it's funny because I feel like so many networks and studios continue to try to go back to draw water from the well of 21st century noir and like, hard R crime material. But he just has such a distinct kind of tone and atmosphere in all of his films where even though the storylines are all very different, it's like instantly
yeah.
recognizable. It's like,
You know his work when you see it.
yeah, it's very
Um,
granite hard. It's very tough stuff, but very interesting, not cliche at all. Like very interesting
By the
stuff
way, if you haven't seen it, his first film, Bone Tomahawk,
with
is
Kurt
really
Russell.
good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm in that one too. I'm in all. He told me years ago, before we ever started working together, that I will be in every film he ever makes.
Oh,
So,
great.
so far, he has kept to that. He has kept to his word about that,
A
and we're
rare thing
friends
indeed.
also. Yeah, and this next film that we are collaborating on together, I have a juicier, bigger part in than some of his other films, and
Nice.
it's a very interesting film called Hug Chicken Penny, and it stars. I think I'm only allowed to allude to Vince Vaughn and myself. Um, but it's a very different film from any that you've ever seen him make before. It's a sort of Dickensian story about a young infant who is born out of wedlock, who is born um, with strange deformities, looks very much not like a normal person. Um, and he is adopted by a series of people, none of whom really treat him very well. And yet, in spite of that, he kind of maintains a sort of a hopefulness, a kind of optimism about life. And in his short life, does some important things. So that's this film, Hug Chicken Penny, and it was written as a novel first, and you can actually buy the novel if you're interested on Amazon or elsewhere. So that will, presuming that we are COVID safe enough, which we are all hoping for.
Absolutely.
By the way, I've had to turn down in the last month. I've had to turn down 4 things that I really would have liked to do. One was a very big David O. Russell film.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and I because I'm at high risk for COVID, I'm at particularly high risk. I just can't do it. You know, the unions have made an attempt to establish protocols that make it safe. But the fact of the matter is, from my perspective, that it ain't safe enough yet.
Yeah.
So you know, I have a friend who works on a show that's shot on the Paramount lot, and she told me, well, ours is the one, you know, the Paramount lot has maybe 80 stages on it, something like that. And she said, ours is the one that's still working. They keep shutting them down. You know, and the problem is that if you're in a city like Los Angeles, you know, crew people go home, and they have kids and they have families and they have this and that. And therefore, you're always exposed to some degree of risk. And if I get COVID, I'm likely to not survive it because of various things I have wrong with me. So I have to be super, super careful. So this is all a long explanation of saying that if things are COVID safe, if enough people are vaccinated, we will begin later this year at some point this film, Hug Chicken Penny. I'm also working on a project I've been working on for a long time, which is a television thing that I wrote and presumably will produce if it does get finished and bought, called The Preservationist, which is a story about a man inspired by, although not the story of, a guy that I knew very well who was well known in the world of maps, rare maps, particularly early maps of the Americas, was a dealer and expert in that field. And after many years as a kind of a preeminent figure in that world, much loved and much respected in that world, was caught stealing. And he eventually admitted to having been one of the most prolific document thieves, map thieves, certainly of all time, and went to prison for it, but is a beloved, and rightly a beloved guy, a fascinating person who had this kind of strange need to be a kind of a rescuer of other people and be an example that life was a winnable proposition for them. So I wrote a movie, initially a feature about you know, my kind of idea about a person like this, and then I decided to work it into long form for television.
Nice.
So I'm also working on that, which is called The Preservationist.
That sounds very exciting, and there's definitely never been a better time to be in the TV biz than right now, considering the way it has completely reinvented itself in the 21st century, especially for things in long form. And I really appreciate you taking the time to squeeze me into your schedule, Fred.
I'm happy to. Happy to.
And after such a storied career, I really look forward to seeing you and what you pop into next. And I'll definitely keep my eyes out for the Zoller film for sure, because he's quite an eccentric but interesting emerging voice out there, we'll say. But take care, all the best, and I'll send you the link as soon as it goes online.
Great, thank you, Alex. Pleasure talking to you.
Yeah, likewise. Take care, and I'll be in touch. See ya.
Take care.